to talk a little bit in general about crucifixion. Okay? First of all, the Romans did not invent crucifixion. It was invented by the Persians. The Greeks brought it back to the Mediterranean. It was copied by the Romans and used as capital punishment in the Roman Empire. But a Roman citizen was not allowed to be crucified. The only exception to the rule was an army deserter who was caught. He was crucified. Also, there was another exception. There really was a slave revolt, like Spartacus. There really was a slave revolt in Rome, and they say that 5,000 slaves were crucified on the Appian Way going into Rome. Normally, crucifixion was saved for the colonies. This is a colony. While the Romans were here, the Jews, no matter what court, did not have the right to hand out capital punishment. Only the Romans. So when a person is found guilty of a crime, then they would take him to the Antonia Fortress, where we are right now. They would strip off his clothing. There would be a post in the courtyard or inside one of the rooms. His back would be arched. They tie his arms, and then they lay into him with a scowling. How does that work? It's not a whip. It's a wooden handle with strands of leather or chain hanging down with ball bearings at the end of it and pieces of broken animal bone intermediately tied into the lashes. So the person who's stretched out like this, the person who is ministering this is an expert. He knows how to use his wrist movement. Every time he hits you, he's ripping tissue and skin. So after about half a dozen of the lashes, you're open to the bone. They don't want to kill you. They want to soften you up before they put you on the cross. They don't want you to last that long. A human being can last for about 3 days on the cross before they die. So therefore, they give the person back his clothing. They give him a crossbeam. Nobody carried a cross. You're 120 pounds. You're going to carry a 600-pound piece of wood through the cobblestone streets of Jerusalem? It ain't going to happen. They give you the crossbeam. Even that's a balancing act at 80 or 90 pounds, okay? And they take you to the site of crucifixion, which is a permanent site of crucifixion where they have posts already in the ground, okay? So therefore, they take you to the site. They will strip you of your clothing, because part of crucifixion is also to humiliate you, to show your nakedness. They throw you to the ground. They knew much about the anatomy of a person. Obviously, the nail did not go through here. It went right there between the two bones, and it will nestle through there. It will sever something, not a major artery. There won't be a lot of blood, but it's going to sever a major nerve that's the most sensitive nerve in your body. It's called the motosensory nerve, or the median nerve. So now you have this piece of iron going through your wrist into the crossbeam. Then they would lift you up with like pitchforks. They would lift you up and it will nestle on top of the post. The post is kind of like a tongue and groove. It went right into a groove like that, and boom, there you are. Although we look upon a cross like the Catholic cross looking like this, most likely most of the crucifixes look like this. It looked like a letter T, or in Greek it's called tau, the letter tau. This is the tau. That's how a person was crucified. Now, I'll tell you why we look at it differently in a moment. There's a little podium that he can rest his backside on. Now he's hanging from his wrist with the iron falling forward. His legs are straddling the post, and a nail will go through each ankle into the post. Or sometimes they'll bend your knees somehow in a very discomforting position and put a nail through both feet. So now your whole chest cavity has fallen forward. Okay? You need breaths of air. So what happens is now you fill up your lungs with air, and that's where the pain begins. Excruciating pain. Listen to the term excruciating. The term inside excruciating is C-R-U-S or Z, whatever. Cruce, which is cross. The word excruciating comes from crucifixion. All right? So now his body, he wants to raise up, and that's what the electrical shock is going through him, of this hot wire rubbing up against a piece of iron. So now he tries to prevent it, and he falls forward. And he's afraid to have lungfuls of air. Without lungfuls of air, your circulatory system is not going to work properly. There's not going to be a proper bloodstream going up to your heart. It's going to become stiff and sluggish, thick. And you're not going to have a steady heartbeat. And also, you're not going to get enough adrenaline to the brain. You're just kind of laying there like this, okay? And little by little, you will die of asphyxiation. In other words, your lungs are going to fill up with fluid and you're going to drown. And after about 3 days, you should be dead. The Roman legion was not allowed to leave until the body was dead. Okay? And they weren't allowed to put a spear into Russia. They had to wait there till the person suffered. And that's a long suffering. 3 days on a cross. Okay? And when the person died, the bodies were not allowed to be taken off. They were left to rot. Which means the next person who's crucified is crucified either right on the excrement and the rotted flesh of the person that was there before him. Now, about the cross like this. The Romans had a piece of wood with a plaque on it, and on that plaque was your crime, and they'd walk down the streets carrying that, just like they did with Jesus, okay? And then they would hammer it behind the post right above your head, so it's sticking above your head. So that kind of gives you the impression of the Latin cross like that. That's crucifixion. Ugly. Okay? That's crucifixion. Now, in the case of Jesus, it seems there tends to be a bunch of exceptions to the rule, and I think it's because of a fellow by the name of Joseph of Arimathea who had some clout with Pontius Pilate. Jesus is arrested. We'll talk more about the arrest later on, but he's arrested. He is condemned by Pontius Pilate. I truly believe that he was condemned in a courtyard near the palace area, and then he was taken here by the legion. This is where he would be whipped. What happens is this. They take off his clothing, they tie him like that against the post, and he's going to receive one less than the given amount. I think it's 48 lashes. He received 47. I'm confused. Or did he receive 48? The most you were allowed to get, he got one less. 39. 39, okay, so it's 40 lashes. 39 lashes he gave him. If you would live through 40, they'd let you free. Nobody can live past 12. But that wasn't his calling. He was on divine timetable. His calling was to die on the cross. So he stayed alive. If he wanted to, he could really piss them off, and every time they whip him, he'll heal himself. He could do that, right? But he didn't. He took 39 lashes, and he still was alive. Literally, he's open to the bone. And then they play a game with him. Okay, they hit him, and they spit at him, and they bow in front of him like a king. And they take this very flexible twig that has thorns on it, which they use to tie up firewood. And they make a crown of thorns, and they force it on his head. Guys, the thorns are like this thick. Okay, so if he was not enough that he's bleeding profusely from his back, but now he's busting all the blood corpuscles in the head, and he's bleeding a lot now from his forehead. Then they give him back his clothing, which by this time, as the blood is coagulating, it's now sticking to the cloth that he has on his back. Then they give him the crossbeam, and they lead him out to be crucified. Guys, we're inside the prison right here. These are stones inside the prison. In a moment, you see there's a railing over there. You'll take a look at the stones on the other side there, and you're going to see stones with ridges carved on them. They carved the ridges on them because they were street stones. It was for friction, because sometimes the stones can get very smooth or slippery whenever it rains. Okay? Which means that where that rail is, you'll make believe there's a wall. Here you're inside the prison, there you're out in the streets of Jerusalem. He walked on those stones going to Calvary. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean it's exactly the same route that we did above us, but this is the street stones of Jerusalem. So, he's carrying the crossbeam, which is very difficult for him to do, because they nearly beat him to death. Therefore, they pick out a man in the crowd, Simon of Cyrene. You're going to carry it for him the rest of the way. They take him to the site of crucifixion, which is right next to a major gate, next to a major road going into the city. The same deal. They strip him of his garments. Now, we don't know, because every time we see a painting of Jesus, obviously, they're not going to show him nude. But the Roman legion treated him as though he was just another criminal. So I'm going to assume that he was stripped of his clothing, or it's very possible that Joseph of Arimathea, who had clout with Pontius Pilate, said, listen, this is not just your regular criminal that you call him. He is also a rabbi. Okay? Let's just give him the satisfaction of covering him up. That's a possibility. Okay? Now, the same thing that I explained to you about crucifixion, the same thing happened to him. He was nearly dead by the time they put him up. He didn't last more than maybe 3 or 4 hours on the cross. Okay? And then he died. How did he die? They say that his heart was like wax. It was crushed within him. That's exactly what happened. His heart was filled, the membrane around the heart was filled up with adrenaline, and in a sense it kind of crushed the heart and stopped the arteries from having blood flow into his heart. Okay, that's what happened. His heart burst. So when they stuck the spear in his side to see if he was dead or alive, what came out was a watery blood, like a pinkish blood, because they had burst the sac where the adrenaline was. Okay? So he didn't last 3 days on a cross, really just a few hours. Why was his body allowed to be taken off the cross if he was just another common criminal? Very good possibility that Pontius Pilate did not look upon him as a blasphemer. What does he care if he runs around telling everybody he's the king of the Jews? But he's a Galilean. Most of the Galileans were zealots, like criminals and terrorists. Okay, what was his proof? One of his boys was carrying a concealed weapon and cut off one of the guard's ears. He doesn't know if everybody in his group was carrying concealed weapons, but Peter was, right? So maybe he looked upon him as a troublemaker, as a zealot, and he did not want the body of Christ to be a rallying point for people in the street. So perhaps he just said, you know what, let's get rid of the problem as quickly as possible, take him off, bury him, and let's forget about the whole affair. That's a possibility. That's crucifixion. It's saddening. It sounds terrible, but he beat the system. He came back to life 3 days later, guys. Okay, so although it may sound saddening and threatening, this whole description, he was resurrected. That's crucifixion. Anybody have any questions? Whew. Read Psalm 22 when you have every chance. Everything that's mentioned in Psalm 22 occurred to him on the cross. Wow, everyone's like quiet. That's how it happened, guys. All right? Listen, he was born on a divine timetable. He was born to die. You know what? Give that to me if you don't mind. I want to read it.
Thank you.
And then we'll be like on our way. He was probably about to say something like this when he was on the cross. But don't forget, he was dehydrated. His tongue was probably twice the size and clinging to the top of his mouth. He was in shock. He was confused. Psalm 22. Okay. Actually, it says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He actually said it in Aramaic. Eli, Eli, lama ta shachachta. Why are you so far from helping me? And from the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear. And at night season, I am silent. I'm going to skip a little bit here. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot their lip. They shake their head. He trusted in the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let him be delivered, since he delights in him. Meaning, like, let's say you walk off the cross, since you're really close with God, right? I'm going to stop. Here it says also, 12. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths, like a raging bull and roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It has melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws, dehydrated. You have brought me to the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. That's exactly what the Roman soldiers did. They wanted to get something out of the crucifixion. Roman soldiers were not paid a lot of money. And there was a market for rags. Right? They cast lots for his clothing. Everything that occurred to Christ happened here. It's as though it was all orchestrated. Exactly what's happening here is what happened to him. Any questions? If you like, you may take a look over the railing there, and you'll see the stones with the ridges on them. Those are the street stones of Jerusalem. You may rise, take a look. You can even walk on those stones if you wish to do so.